Okay, everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we're actually revisiting what I think is a really fun comparison between two very similar yet very different watches. One from Seiko and the other from Hamilton. Now, we've already compared the Khaki Field Murph 38 and the baby Prospex Alpinist before in the past, but I do find myself continuing to return back to these two watches in terms of daily wear, and in this case now comparing them on bracelets I think is a lot of fun, and two contrasting bracelets, but in this case from the same brand, being Uncle Straps, with the executive bracelet on the Seiko and then the Senator bracelet on the Hamilton. Of course, I do want to send a big shout out to channel sponsors Belmont Watches for of course supporting the channel and enabling me to do other segments apart from just my basic kind of weekly watch reviews and get into some fun stuff like this, which is, I think, a really neat comparison between, again, two very different and similar watches. In this case, this being the follow-up, if you guys haven't already, definitely check out kind of part one where I put them on actually similar straps. This is actually a different baby Alpinist. I feel like this one might even be a better comparable, although the color palette of the previous comparison might have been a little bit more direct. I feel like, at the end of the day, these two are the ones that I reach for and end up being kind of pitted against each other more naturally. So I thought, why not feature them here? Also, they have, the bracelets that are, again, a little bit different, but also quite comparable in terms of their construction, thanks to them being from the same company. So I thought, hey, why not? So with that said, let's go ahead and get a quick word from our channel sponsors before we dive in.
You're never just buying a watch, you're buying the seller too. Well, here's a seller I can absolutely recommend. Belmont Watches in San Diego. Adam and Anthony are the real deal, true collectors with an enthusiast's eye. Check out their well-curated and regularly updated selection at belmontwatches.com. Follow along for weekly drops, and if you don't see something you like, reach out and connect. They might just have a lead on one of your own Grail watches. I've personally purchased both new and used from them, and even used their servicing and repair network. From new releases to vintage references and everything in between, whether niche independence or the horological holy trinity, Belmont has you covered. With competitive pricing and quick shipping, you can enjoy a friction-free experience. So before your next big purchase, make sure to check out Belmont Watches and tell them Mark sent you.
Ah, yes, Belmont Watches. Again, a huge thank you and shout out. Now, guys, these two are really awesome watches, and honestly, you really can't go wrong with either one of these guys. They're both wonderful in terms of being capable everyday timepieces, and I think obviously their aesthetic with the cathedral hands and, the numeral dials do feel, again, quite comparable. Actually, let's get these a quick little wipe here. Actually, let me get this one there. Sorry about that, guys. And compare them. Of course, they both do have warmer tones to them. The Hamilton having that warm ivory color palette over the matte black, whereas here you can see on the Seiko that really nice kind of warm gilt tone over that mocha dial. And this one has a little bit more going on in terms of that dial, and which ultimately I think make it more competitive. Unfortunately, there's no kind of, I think, flashier version of the Murph, aside from just a larger version, right? But I think both of these have their own merits. But let's get into some of the details, some of the things that make them similar, some of the things that make them different. Now, in terms of the diameter, you have a 38 millimeter case on on the Seiko versus a 38 millimeter case on the Hamilton. But when you look at them, I think visually the Hamilton appears larger. Now that is going to be more about proportions because its dial feels just a bit more expansive and the overall silhouette feels a bit more flat by comparison to the Seiko, whereas the Seiko is a little bit more rounded and sculpted, as you guys can see here. Let me get that to focus. There you go. More rounded, more sculpted, feels a little bit more bubbly. And then, of course, I think with that outer track that just slightly pushes everything in more to the center, it just appears a little bit smaller. Now, in terms of thickness, though, you're getting 12.9 millimeters versus 11.2. So in terms of that thickness there, you guys can see it's going to be a little bit more comparable, but the watch that's going to be thinner ultimately is going to be the Hamilton. Lug to lug, another interesting thing, 44.4 lug to lug versus 45.9. So a little bit, a little bit different there again, but overall, when you get these kind of in hand, I think they do wear quite similar. But if you're looking for something that's going to be a little bit more slim feeling, but flat and ultimately visually rendering a bit larger, thanks to the proportions, I think the Hamilton might be the one for you if you're looking for something that's just going to be a little bit more bold and legible. Maybe even getting into that range to where, that almost feels like it could be a pilot's watch in terms of its legibility. Whereas I think the Alpinist, the baby Alpinist in particular, feels more like that classic field watch in terms of its proportions. Now, getting into the crystals, you get sapphire crystals on either, except you're going to get, I think, a better anti-reflective treatment here on the Seiko versus the Hamilton, where I think it could be better. If you look at this, you guys can see, take a look at the reflection of the camera back on the watch, right? You guys can actually see that pretty clearly, whereas here, you're having to search a little bit more, and I think that's just due to the fact that you can find it. Like if I look at right there where the light is reflecting off the body of the camera, you can see it, but then the lens a little bit harder to spot here. Very, very clear by comparison. And it might even be that you could say that, okay, well, one dial helps camouflage the reflection better. But at the end of the day, when you're trying to photograph these, your Hamilton is going to be a little bit tougher to photograph because that anti-reflective layer that's finally there, which is great and I'm appreciative of, just isn't as, as strong or as functional by comparison to the Seiko. Now, you're getting here a push-pull crown versus a screw-down crown. Now, that push-pull crown is going to get you 100 meters of water resistance, which is great, 10 bar, and, perfectly suitable for every day. You just have to make sure that the crown is pushed in so that all of those seals are going to be engaged. Now, on the Seiko, you get a little bit of extra, a little bit double the security at 200 meters of water resistance or 20 bar, and you're getting a screw-down crown. So in terms of like everyday kind of toughness and usability, this is one that you're really not going to have to worry about as long as that crown is pushed in. And then getting into the dials, of course, one is fully printed and they're both fully printed, but what you will notice is the Seiko does have an applied logo, which I think does add a little bit more to the refinement. Also, you're going to be getting a date. So a date window, some people that's a must. For others, having the symmetry of a no date setup could absolutely be the more preferable way to go. So then you do have the Hamilton, Murph doing well and excelling within that space. Now, looking at the handset, here you can see they're both matted, but on here you're going to see they're more of a matte blast on the Hamilton versus a brushed finish on the Seiko. So check that out. Of course, the gilded colored way is going to help stand out as well. but you guys can see they do have that just extra layer of texture, and of course it ties into the texture of the dial, which I think is very, very nice. And again, when I'm, if there's ever a situation where I could wear this watch, chances are it's also a situation where I could either wear this watch depending on depending on the day. But if I'm wearing something that is going to be a little bit warmer, more earth tonish kind of thing, right? If it was just straight up black and white, I wouldn't probably wear either of these, because one, they both kind of have that warmer tone to them. So I have other watches that are going to be more of that high contrast black and white setup. So these definitely fall more into kind of that warmer palette. And yeah, that's why they end up kind of competing against each other quite naturally. Let's see what else. In terms of the movements, again, very comparable. So here, 80-hour power reserve. Here, you're going to have a 70-hour power reserve, both of them beating at 3 hertz, both of them having non-metallic hairsprings, Spron 510 mainstring on the Seiko, and then a Nivacron balance spring on the Hamilton. One difference, though, is you are not going to have the simple adjustability of the manual setup on this Powermatic 80 movement. So, yes, it can be serviced outside of the swatch group, but in terms of you being able to adjust it manually, that's not really going to be the case, although they are typically going to be a little bit more solid in terms of their out-of-box regulation. Whereas the Seiko, you can easily manually kind of tune in, just by unscrewing the case back and turning the little screw lever on your own. And then if you really want to wind it in, dial it in, of course, you could always get it regulated, by your local watchmaker, and they'll be fine doing that. So that is something to consider. But, in terms of the beat rate there, similar sweeps at 3 hertz or 21,600 vibrations per hour. They both also do have 20 millimeter lugs and are featured on these Uncle Straps bracelets. The Uncle Straps Executive Bracelet, which is a Jubilee style bracelet, or the Uncle Straps Senator Bracelet, which is more of a 3-link oyster style. And they're both integrated very well in terms of the execution on the end link. They do have a very nice kind of OEM-like appearance to them. In terms of kind of the case profile, you can see a very simple, which ties into the very simple layout of this Hamilton, very clean, but by comparison, you're going to have a lot more complex things going on. Let me give it a quick little wipe here on the Seiko, which is typically the case. That's really where Seiko excels within its price point. Is going to be the level of case finishing. So the level of complexity, the high level of finish. You can see even having that high polished bevel on the inner horns of the lugs, and then of course the nice sculpted outer body, which is really well done. And this end link does a wonderful job of tying into in terms of that flow. Also, if we get this at a harsh angle, you can see their single dome, which is going to mean that it's only domed on one side. I'm going to say the outside, and the other side's flat. So when you get it at a harsh angle, you're going to get some distortion. Let's see here. Ooh, double dome action. So you're going to have domed on the outside, domed on the inside, which means there's going to be less distortion at the really harsh angles. So check that out. So nice side by side. You can see the hand stack and everything is still very, very legible when you do have that double domed crystal. So yeah, I mean, it's not like there's a 1-for-1 in terms of hey, this one has all the advantages. I think there's trade-offs that make them, quite enticing either way. But with that said, let's actually get these pieces on wrist and see how they wear. Okay, as you guys can see, this 38 millimeter Hamilton Khaki Field Murph looks absolutely immaculate. Check that out. Beautifully thin profile on the wrist, hugs the wrist really, really well. Nice, manageable lug to lug, shorter than your standard Hamilton Khaki Field 38. So really beautiful. Of course, if I get my wrist a bit too close to the lens here, you're going to get some distortion, and it's going to somehow make the watch appear much larger than it does. So what I like to do is keep my wrist nice and low, and then just tighten up the frame here so you guys can get still a detailed look, but just add a bit of a truer aspect ratio. So check that out. Ooh, you can't complain about the way this thing wears. I think it's super versatile. Even on my larger 7.5-inch wrist, this suits it really, really well. And of course, although my wrist is slightly on the larger side of average at 7.5 inches, you can see it's also quite round and tall. So it's not like it's just this big, flat, wide, accommodating wrist. So, you know, in terms of long lugs and whatnot and case proportions, I'm also still, you know, having to keep those things within consideration to, you know, get that ultimate comfort and that dialed in appearance. Now, when I compare here with this beautiful Seiko Baby Alpinist, by the way, this is the SPB 211 J1, or that's the international nomenclature, or the JDM one would be SBDC 317. Wow, this one definitely, again, it has a bit of a rounder profile to it, but it doesn't feel tall, right? Check that out. It's still very nice. And of course, those curves do help hide that ultimate height and whatnot. It does just ultimately feel a bit more refined and more complex. And it absolutely is. And I think that pairs well with the bracelet, right? With that Jubilee style bracelet, ultimately, as clean and as classic as that is, it just adds an extra layer of complexity and refinement. Very nice. I mean, both of these are going to have a beautiful taper on them to, you know, again, in terms of the construction, both being from Uncle Straps are going to be very similar. But I think that wear profile, check that out. It's just, this one feels more, if you like a smaller watch, I will say that this might wear a little bit smaller than a 38. It wears on the smaller side of 38, whereas here, it will wear on the larger side of 38. Visually, of course, you're going to have that thinness, which does make the watch overall feel flatter and wider. So that's one of those things. As much as I love a nice thin watch, one thing to consider is that when you do have a thinner watch, it's nice to kind of button down some of the width at the same time. So here in this case, guys, maybe if this was a little bit thicker, it might feel a little bit more proportional, which I think is really interesting, and you don't really get that too often when you're laying two watches side by side. But you can see again on the 38mm watch, both of them, and for some reason that Seiko just appears a bit smaller, and a lot of that has to do with that dial layout as well as that dial to bezel ratio, whereas you can notice the bezel thickness versus the size of the dial opening there on the Baby Alpinist feels like a smaller dial opening with a slightly larger bezel, versus here, slightly larger opening with a slightly thinner bezel. But still nice. Like, I don't think this appears oversized at all. I think it's really just comparable, right? If you're somebody who maybe wants something closer to feeling of a 36mm, I don't know if the Hamilton will keep you happy. Whereas I think on terms of being that 38 that could potentially fill that space for you if you are, let's say, really into like the 36mm Explorer type of vibe. I think that's where the Seiko might just nudge a little bit ahead in terms of that wear profile. But with that said, let's actually get these pieces off the wrist, set up for some loom shots, the light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. All right, as you can see, both actually surprisingly well done in terms of loom, but you're going to get a lot more of it on the Hamilton, which is a bit surprising because they're obviously not really known for their loom. But I will say, in terms of the potency of the loom, I think you're definitely going to be getting more brightness and longevity with the Seiko. Look at that. If I just try to shade it a little bit more, you guys can notice as we sit here, that green is, while it's quite strong on the hands, on the dial, it already has a bit of a fade to it, whereas that baby Alpinist is going to be burning quite nice, and even an interesting blue toned hue, which seems to be the case for one. Seiko does do their slightly patina tinted lume, their Lumabrite. They tend to have more of a blue hue to it, so interesting here. I think they both work. I think in terms of the fact that they do originate from the world of, military field watches. Of course, these aren't divers. They don't require a ton of, evening time legibility. I think it still works really, really nice either way. But again, I will say in terms of comparatively, the Seiko has the brighter, probably better application, whereas on the Hamilton, you're going to be getting still really nice lume, especially for a Hamilton, because they're not really known for their lume. It's just going to have more surface area, which at a glance is going to be able to help you out in terms of legibility. It's not necessarily going to be due to the potency or the overall brightness, right? So, but one thing I do like to work in when I do these kind of lume shots is work in a little bit of a low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting, guys. Maybe even include a bit of harsh lighting, which typically could wash out, and expose any types of production defects. But all you're gonna notice here is, of course, a bunch of micro scratches under 4K, thanks to daily wear on both of these pieces. Neither of them have been babied. Of course, I do have quite a few watches, over 100 at this point, well over. So in terms of my rotation, there's not like there's gonna be anything that's gonna be worn daily. They might get some back-to-back wear here and there, but overall, pretty much most of my watches are going to be in pretty outstanding condition, even my G-Shocks, right? But you guys can see here that these look really quite immaculate. The luster on the polishing, very, very nice. And then, of course, the satinization on the brushing, also very clean as the light glides over. And then, they're both really beautifully fitted on these aftermarket Uncle Straps bracelets, which I think flow really well and do suit the overall personality of each watch, right? One being a little bit more traditional, a little bit more toned down, while the other just having a little bit more of a retro kind of flair to it, feeling a little bit more purposeful, a little bit more dressed up. Again, although it does have a very, they do both share very similar aesthetics with those cathedral hands, the numeral dials, and the overall kind of more warm and chocolatey layout in terms of the warmth of the contrasting colors on the dial. But you guys can see, even when you're not relying on the lume itself, right, they're still very legible. The numbers, although the numerals aren't loomed on that baby Alpinist, you guys can see they catch light and they hold the light really, really well due to their kind of bright golden contrast that you're going to get there, right? So very interesting. Of course, the dials can render very similar in the dark, right, where you're going to get, just a darker color palette with some gold, which again isn't going to be the highest contrast color. If it was a pure white color, it would definitely be a higher contrast. But then when we get some more light on there, you're going to see that tropical dial, the textured dial, even with a light little sun ray coming through it, just having a lot more going on, being a lot more dynamic, whereas the Hamilton is going to, I think, kind of hold strong and keep that same aesthetic kind of throughout, right? Even if I get to a place where I'm really drenching it in light, right, that's going to be a reflective surface, it becomes more of that brighter kind of gray anthracite tone, whereas the Seiko, thanks to that finishing there with the sunray pattern, it's never going to necessarily blow out as much, because even if I do try to blow it out, it still has the contrast kind of quadrant style. We're going to see some bright streaks and then some darker radiuses there that are going to be moving throughout. So, I mean, these are great looking watches all the way around. And again, guys, you can't go wrong with either. I'm a big fan of both of these pieces. They're both personal pieces of mine that I wear, again, very in a competitive way. These guys end up kind of being pitted against each other in terms of, oh, well, I have this flannel that goes great with either one of these, and when I'm wearing it, I'm going to choose one of these, and ultimately I'm making that choice based off of which one is more compelling to me. And again, the reason why this is worthy of a segment is because I struggle with that. There's no real clear winner, and I have so many watches that you wouldn't be surprised to hear that. So if you're just going to choose one of these, again, I probably can't tell you which one, but hopefully I've been able to really, lay out some of those differences, whether it be, hey, one has a very more balanced style, but it is more expansive, being the Hamilton, and then one feels a little bit dressier, right? One feels a little bit more sedate and clean, satin and flat. The other has a little bit more flash and a little bit more pizzazz to it. Also, in terms of that layout, right? In terms of the ultimate visual test, whereas maybe the Hamilton Khaki still feels a little bit large for you, I think that baby Alpinist from Seiko might be right up your alley. And then also it's going to be a little bit more robust in terms of its shock resistance, as well as the fact that it does have a screw down crown, offering you double the amount of water resistance, right? Whereas Hamilton, unfortunately, with the lack of a screw down crown, has even found itself with the crown being pushed in, having fogging issues. I haven't had any fogging issues with this particular Hamilton, but I can't deny that those reports are out there. So, again, I think there are some absolute trade-offs, that do help contrast these pieces, but I think they're a lot of fun to compare. So let me know down in the comments below, which one do you kind of lean towards? Which one do you own? What, would you ever cross shop against the other? Maybe you love the Hamilton and you wouldn't give it a second guess to even think about the Seiko, or even Seiko as a brand, or maybe you just love Seiko so much that you're not huge into Hamilton. I love the movie Interstellar, so this Hamilton tying into that, right? Also being within Hamilton's history of, historically being known for, being kind of that movie, that cinema watch. I think that's great. I'm a big Christopher Nolan fan as well. So yeah, the Murph, there is definitely a certain bit of nostalgia. There's a certain bit of just that romance that comes with it. Whereas this Alpinist, again, the baby Alpinist is probably one of the lesser desired Seiko Alpinists. Most people think of the Alpinist to think of that inner rotating bezel and everything like that. The baby Alpinist is, I'd say more of a niche player from that perspective, whereas the Murph, I feel like, has a lot more crossover appeal. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Again, who inches ahead for you? And for some of you, again, it might be a complete blowout. You might say, hey, I have to have a date, or I don't have a watch, or hey, I would never buy a watch with the date. Or maybe you don't like either of these because they have display case backs and they show off movements that aren't particularly impressive in terms of their finishing. So again, big shout out to Belmont Watches. Thank you guys again. Definitely check out their links down in the description, guys. Huge fan, and again, they're helping me bring to you guys segments just like this. So with that said, let me know what you all think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please do like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.